Hello, welcome to Alyssa Jean's Reviews, and this is my complete full review of Star Trek Lower Decks Season 1. This is a rewind review, as I'm doing this 3 years after the season was released. And I actually did not do reviews of this season when it originally aired because it came out in 2020 during the year in which I did not have a YouTube channel. So this will be the first time I'm ever reviewing these episodes, but I'm also going to do one for seasons 2 and 3 as well. So in this video, I will be covering all 10 episodes of the first seasons of Lower Decks, and I will be going through each episode one at a time. That's why this video is so long. And I will be giving my review, my rating out of 10, and then Easter eggs and observations, things that I observed and noticed as I rewatched the episode. So I will be doing that for each of the 10 episodes. And if you only want to watch these one at a time or two at a time, you can click on a particular episode review that you want to see by clicking on the timestamps in the description below. Now, I don't want to spend too much time on a preamble, so let us just go ahead and jump into it. We'll start with the first episode, Season 1, Episode 1, and I will, as I said, go through my review, rating out of 10, and then Easter eggs and observations. So here we go. Okay, so starting with Season 1, Episode 1, which is called Second Contact. So I remember when I first saw this, and again, this I haven't seen since 2020, so this was my first time rewatching this. In fact, that's true of the first 7 episodes. This is my first time rewatching them since they originally aired in 2020. So I remember thinking that storyline with the people turning into zombies and everyone just kind of acting like it was normal and nothing was going on, I remember thinking that was really funny. But upon my rewatch, I was kind of like, I don't actually think it's that funny. And I think it's because when I compare it to what Lower Decks would do later, especially at the end of Season 1, which I'll get to, and then into Seasons 2 and 3, and kind of the humor that they would use in those seasons, in comparison to this is kind of really not all that funny, honestly. It's not actively unfunny. I'll get to some actively unfunny stuff later in this video, in fact, coming up soon in Episode 2. But I just think it's kind of like, this is kind of nothing compared to the humor that Lower Decks would give us in later seasons. I suppose it's a good introduction to the characters, kind of get us into that world. At this point, the characters are very two-dimensional. Mariner is very, very Mariner. Tendi is very Tendi. Boimler is kind of annoying how by the book he is, something that he continues to be for the first several episodes. Rutherford, they kind of really go all in on his cybernetic implants more than they would do moving forward, but they also go into his nerdiness, which they continue to do a lot throughout the first season. So it was an okay introduction to the series, not particularly funny. So my rating out of 10 for Second Contact is a 5. 5 out of 10 upon my rewatch. All right, so now let's talk about some Easter eggs and observations for this episode, Second Contact. So I did not realize this until my rewatch, but Cetacean Ops was mentioned for the very first time way back in Episode 1. Of course, we would see it at the end of Season 2. That's the one with the beluga whales. which of course has its origins in like what was the Enterprise D manual that came out or something like that, whatever it was. But Boimler is telling Tendi about the coolest parts of the ship, and he mentioned Citation Ops as one of the coolest parts of the ship. I also noted that there is a couple of different background characters with Geordi visors, which I find to be interesting since Geordi himself no longer wears the visor at this point in the timeline, because this is after Nemesis, where Geordi wasn't wearing the visor anymore. So I guess these other people don't have access to the fancy surgery that Geordi got, because they're just ensigns or whatever. Also, an observation here, Shax recommends detonating the warp core for the very first time in the very first episode, and that's something that would come to fruition finally at the end of season 3. Let's see, of course, we get the debut of Ensign Barnes, the Trill girl that Rutherford goes on a date with, who appears on the bridge in many episodes moving forward. And this one's, I have one last thing that's not an Easter egg. It's something that's just worth noting on a personal note. It's how I have a personal connection to this episode. So this episode began streaming on August 5th, 2020. And here's a picture of me on August 5th, 2020. This was the second day of my transition. So I started HRT, which is hormone replacement therapy, on August 4th, 2020. And that's like a big day for me. That's my second birthday. That's how us trans people tend to treat that day, the day of our HRT. It's like a second birthday. So August 4th, 2020 was a big deal to me. This picture taken on August 5th was actually one of my favorite pictures of myself in the early days of my transition. I'm still wearing a wig then. So between August 4th and August 5th of 2020, two things that really brought joy to my life came about. Although, the Lower Decks bringing joy to my life isn't anywhere close to HRT, but Lower Decks has brought joy to my life. Maybe not the first season as much, but since then it definitely has. So it's kind of cool that Lower Decks premiered the day after I started my HRT. So personal thing for me. All right, now let's go ahead and move on to the next episode. All right, moving on to Season 1, Episode 2, Envoys. So this is the one where Boimler and Mariner go off on this mission together to escort this Klingon ambassador or whatever, and they lose him, and they have all these adventures on this planet that they're on. So this one I would deem as actively unfunny. This one really annoyed the shit out of me in my rewatch. I call this the Mariner Sue episode. This is when Mariner is like a ridiculous, over-the-top Mary Sue. In fact, this is one of the worst Mary Sue episodes in all of Star Trek, and that includes all those Wesley Crusher episodes. Like, it's over the top just how much of a Mary Sue she is. Like, she can do nothing wrong for this whole episode, and anytime they meet some, intimidating figure, the Klingon or the Ferengi or anyone that Boimler is kind of scared of or intimidated by, Mariner, of course, goes way back with them. They're best buddies, and they went through all these adventures together. And Mariner knows everything. She does everything right. And Boimler, in contrast, can't do anything right. He's the exact opposite, and he is trying to be completely by the book. This episode did make me appreciate the bold Boimler storyline in season 3, because it makes me appreciate how much better of a character Boimler is now than he was back in this episode. God, he was not a very good character, and Mariner was just extremely over the top Mary Sue. This episode really irritated me on the rewatch. The Ferengi thing at the end is so dumb and so stupid. Also, this episode has a B plot where Rutherford is trying all these different jobs. While not actively unfunny, still not particularly funny either. So this episode, the rating that I'm giving it out of 10 is a 3. And I don't know, I guess I feel generous. I'm going to go ahead and give it a 3. I have another one coming up later that I'm giving a 2 to, and I think this one's a little better than that one. So this one gets a 3 out of 10. Not a particularly good episode. Now getting into some Easter eggs and observations. So this is the first appearance of Jet, Fletcher, and Jennifer the Andorian, all within non-speaking roles. They're all just kind of appear on your screen for a couple of seconds. Jet, we will see later in the season. Fletcher is the star of episode 6, which I'll get to. And Jennifer the Andorian is who Mariner ends up dating in season 3. But none of them have any speaking roles. Jennifer the Andorian appears at the end when Boimler is telling the story, how he's bragging about how he figured out the Ferengi thing and Mariner was dumb. You see Jennifer Andorian kind of sitting there laughing at it. So now let us go on and move to the next episode, episode 3. All right, moving on to season 1, episode 3, Temporal Edict. So this is the one where Captain Freeman finds out that everybody is using this buffer time, and kind of like what Scotty used to do, and she's making everybody do things more timely and scheduling all these extra things and tiring out the crew, and it kind of causes all these issues and this alien race attacks the ship because they're too tired and they make a mistake, and it kind of gets a little silly. I will say that this is my favorite episode in the first half of the season, although that's not saying much, as I don't think the first half of the season is very good overall. And this episode compares or pales in comparison to later episodes in this season and some of the good ones in seasons 2 and 3. This is nothing compared to those, but as far as the first half of the season, it's probably my favorite. I love how Freeman names that effect the Boimler effect, even though it refers to the opposite of what Boimler wanted. However, it is still annoying that Boimler is acting like that, like he's all by the book. That's just really irritating. I just can't wait to rewatch season 3, and then he gets so much more interesting. Even in season 2, he starts getting more interesting. So the funniest part of this episode is the ending where they're talking about the Boimler effect, and they're like, oh, don't worry about it. People will forget about the Boimler effect. And then they cut to the far, far future where a teacher is teaching her class about how incredibly important the Boimler effect is. Which is ridiculous, but it's really funny. And then it goes on to go, now let's talk about the most important man in Starfleet history, Miles O'Brien. I mean, that's great. So I'll give it kudos for that. So my rating out of 10 for Temporal Edict is a 6. So 6, not a super high rating. So that tells you what I think of the first half of this season. So now let's move on to Easter eggs and observations for episode 3. So this is the first mention of the Delta shift, though we do not see them. And I will give a little asterisk on that. I wrote this down after the fact, so there's a small chance I messed this up and it was in episode 2 that they mentioned the Delta shift, but I'm pretty sure it was episode 3. This was the first appearance of Captain Durango, the Telluride captain of another California class ship. I'm forgetting which one now, but he does come back at the end of season 3 when all those California class ships come in to rescue them. Also, one of the students in that far future class is a Borg child, which I think is pretty funny. They're saying the Borg are now part of the Federation, so maybe it's the Gerati Borg. No kidding. No. I don't want to get into that. Anyways, let's go ahead and move on to the next episode. All right, now we move on to season 1, episode 4, Moist Vessel. This episode to me really is the tale of 2 completely different storylines. The Mariner storyline, which I guess you could call the A-plot. I don't know if there's really an A-plot and B-plot, but anyway, the Mariner storyline is the best storyline of the first half of the season by far. The Tendi storyline is the worst storyline, or I would say one of the worst, among the worst storylines in the entire series, the entire 3 seasons. It is so god awful. So I'll start with that. I'll start with the negative, and then I'll get into the Mariner storyline. So Tendi trying to prove herself to this fucking moron, this really annoying character who lied to her, who's not even a tiny bit spiritual. He doesn't come across as even a little bit spiritual. I think that's supposed to be the joke. It's that old cliche joke, which I have seen done much better on many different other places, where the really spiritual person like does yoga and meditates and like, oh, I'm so spiritual, ends up getting angry really quickly and has a temper. I've seen that done many times, and it's done way better than this. This was so bad. This character was actively obnoxious, and Tendi herself is actively obnoxious. I did not actually like Tendi at all as a character. In the first season, she was very one-dimensional. They go all in on her getting excited about every little thing and going, oh, I can't wait to do that. And on this episode, her whole thing is that she can't stand it when people hate her, and so she has to do everything in her power to please them. And maybe someone might mistake that for character development. It isn't. It is something I could have easily guessed. This is not bringing any more nuance to her character. It fits in with what we already knew about her. The ninth episode, which I'll get to later, is the first one which starts introducing kind of the nuance of Tendi's relationship with the Orion people and her Orion heritage, which they would explore more in season 2. Season 2, they really developed this character a lot more. But here, this is just something I could have guessed pretty easily. Yeah, she likes to please people because that just fits in with her obnoxious character that we already know. And it was so dumb. This is so dumb. This is cringy to watch. And the thing at the end where the guy ascends, God, this is so dumb. This is one of the I just feel dumber sitting through it. It's so fucking stupid. But then we have the Mariner storyline, which I thought was actually pretty good, and it's a great character episode for her. It's kind of the precursor for the later season episode, Crisis Point, which I will get to. That's that episode 9. I kind of love how she's all tortured by every little thing the senior officers do, and not even so much like the work that they do, but all the different, like, they have to go watch people play instruments, and I think Freeman was doing like a jazz improv. And those are the things that really bother Mariner. And there's this funny scene when they're in the conference room arguing about the chairs, and so that was good. And then this episode contains the single funniest scene of the season up to this point, and that's when that admiral comes in at the end and goes, "Sensors." And Mariner's like, "Did you say sensors?" And that just makes fun of him. That was good. It is unfortunate that this episode also has the stupidest, dumbest storyline in the first season. Otherwise, it would be good. So this was an interesting episode to rate. If I were to rate the Mariner storyline alone, I would give it a 9. If I were to rate the Tendi storyline alone, I would give it a 2. So I decided to meet halfway in the middle. So halfway between a 9 and a 2 is a 5.5. So this episode is a 5.5 out of 10. Easter eggs and observations, I didn't catch any, really. Nothing that stood out to me in my rewatch. I will just say that sensors is what Tuvok used to say. He's the one who said sensors that way the most often. So that was really good. So that's all I got for this one. Let's go ahead and move on to episode 5. All right, let's move on to season 1, episode 5, Cupid's Errant Arrow. So ding, 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 ding. Congratulations. We have reached the worst episode of the season and one of the worst episodes in the entire series. This one was torture to sit through. This one is not even a tiny bit funny. I did not even crack a smile. It was actively unfunny and actively irritating. So this is the one where Boimler gets this girlfriend named Barb, and Mariner is convinced that she's an alien of some sort. Meanwhile, Boimler is behaving like an idiot straight out of a sitcom. This is directly out of the worst sitcom trope that I've seen a million times over and over again, where he is convinced that Jet is trying to move in on his girlfriend, and he's jealous of Jet, and he is acting like a moron and doing all these stupid things and dressing up all cool and like, look at me, I'm cool. I've seen this so many times in sitcoms. It's so dumb. And then what really irritated me was the resolution that Mariner's basically right. I mean, she wasn't right about Barb being a secret alien or parasite or something like that, but she was right that Barb didn't really like Boimler, because it turns out Boimler had this parasite. They created these pheromones that cause Barb to like him, because of course Boimler has to be a complete loser. He can't actually have a girlfriend. And I just found that Mariner was really not a good friend and really fucking obnoxious, that she was so convinced, oh, Boimler, you're such a loser, there's no way you can get a girl this good. That sucks. Poor Boimler. I hated this with a passion. Then we have the Rutherford and Tindy B plot, where they're transferred to or they're threatened to be transferred to the Vancouver, and they steal the pad from that lieutenant dude. And while not as actively unfunny as the other one, also not particularly funny. I didn't particularly laugh at this one either. So my rating for Cupid's Errant Arrow out of 10 is a 2. A very strong 2. The only reason it's not a 1 is because it does have some pretty cool Easter eggs and observations that I'll get to in a second. But one of the worst episodes in the entire series. Now let's get into some Easter eggs and observations for Cupid's Errant Arrow. So first, speaking role for Jet. He would come back again in episode 9, and then of course in the second season. Mariner has that, that police board with all the red lines drawn to it, and there's a picture of the salt creature from the original series episode, The Man Trap. She makes references to transporter clones from the Next Generation, which will come to play in the second season. She makes reference to secret Cardassian spies, like what's happened with Major Kira, and makes reference to the Suliban from Enterprise. When Mariner is running through the hall trying to catch Boimler, she knocks over Jennifer the Andorian and says, "Get out of my way, Jennifer!" It just kind of knocks her over. And it's the first time Jennifer the Andorian gets named. It's the first name drop for her, although still doesn't speak, and in fact does not have a speaking role in the entirety of the first season. This is the debut of Boimler's his first name, Bradford, which I didn't realize that it came this late in the season. But this is where Barb calls him Bradford, and Mariner's like, "Your name's Bradford?" Also, at the beginning of the episode, there are these aliens upset about destroying and decaying that decaying moon that's going to threaten their planet. This is more of an observation than an Easter egg, but those aliens was definitely commentary on climate change deniers. They were saying a lot of the same things that climate change deniers did. It's a government conspiracy. And in fact, that scene reminded me of the movie Look Up. So actually one of the few bright spots in this whole episode, to be honest with you. All right, let's go ahead now and move on to the next episode, which is episode 6. Okay, now we move on to season 1, episode 6, Terminal Provications. So I'll start with the Fletcher storyline. This is where we get that character after he made that non-speaking appearance in an earlier episode. So he's in the Mariner and Boimler storyline. So he's not a very interesting nor a very funny character, and I thought the whole idea of this character was quite dumb. However, ultimately he didn't bother me all that much, because what I really do appreciate about the storyline is the fact that for once, Mariner and Boimler really are starting to bond, and this is something that gets developed more and more as the show would progress. So it's nice to see them kind of being on the same side, and now moving away from that dynamic where Mariner was Mary Sue and Boimler wanted everything to be done by the book and was a loser. We're starting to get more development for both these characters, and their relationship particularly moves forward a bunch. So that's kind of what I like most about this episode. So I didn't actually hate the storyline, even though Fletcher is kind of a dumb character. And I don't mean just dumb that he's not smart. I mean the concept of the character is dumb. Then, of course, we have the Badgie storyline. This is the debut of Badgie. It's fine. I don't hate Badgie the way that my brother does, and I don't love him the way that other people do. I honestly don't have strong feelings about the character either way. It's like, whatever, he's fine, he's there. I don't know that I necessarily need to see him brought back in season 4, which is what they teased at the end of season 3, because I feel like he's a one-note character. I don't know what else they could do with him, but maybe they'll surprise me. I don't know. So yeah, this is fine. My rating for Terminal Provications out of 10 is a 6. So the second 6 of the season so far, up to this point, a 6 is the highest rating that I have given. But that is about to change in episode 7, as everything is going to go up from here. But before I get to that, let's get into my Easter eggs and observations for episode 6. So, as I said, first speaking role for Fletcher, first appearance of the Delta Shift. This is the first mention of Starbase 80, which we will see finally in season 3. I didn't realize it was mentioned this far back. It's mentioned when Dr. Katana threatens to send Mariner there after she accidentally knocks her head into a plate of nachos. Rutherford asks, what do you think is on the cargo? A bunch of cryo-frozen princesses or some fruit? And that's gotta be a reference to the horrible Enterprise episode Precious Cargo. I see another girl wearing the Geordi glasses, Geordi visor, which we see throughout the season. The captain of the cargo freighter is voiced by J.D. Hertzinger, or however you say that name. I always have a hard time pronouncing his name. And I do believe that we see this cargo freighter captain later in the series. Doesn't he come back in season 3? But also J.D. Hertzinger will come back and actually voice General Martok in season 3, which is kind of cool. Shax kisses Dr. Katana, and this is the first time that happens on screen. Fletcher gets transferred to the Titan. First mentioned that it's Boimler's dream gig. Of course, he doesn't last long over there. And then Jennifer the Andorian comes in with another non-speaking role at Fletcher's party. All right, now let us move on to the next episode. Okay, now we get into episode 7, Much Ado About Boimler. This episode is fine. I think it's definitely better than Terminal Provications by just a little bit. Like, not tremendously better, but maybe slightly better. And then after this is when the show really gets good. But I think this is probably just by a nose the best episode up to this point, but it's not gotten to the really, really good stuff yet. So we have the 2 Stormler lines. The one with Boimler is much more memorable. In fact, I completely forgot what the other storyline is, which I will get to that in a minute. And it features Mariner. So it was kind of nice for me to see Boimler and Tendi in a storyline together, kind of breaking up that Boimler and Mariner versus Tendi and Rutherford format that they have been using all season and was getting quite old. I thought the Ship of Freaks was pretty funny. I liked how they do the fake out with that guy being evil, and he just goes, "What? That's just how I laugh." I mean, I thought that was pretty good. There's other things that I thought were funny in this episode that I'm going to talk about when I get to the Easter eggs and observations. Now, the Mariner storyline was forgettable. As I said, I just didn't remember that it existed. I don't think it added much to her character. They do the opposite of episode 2 in the beginning. It seems like that's what they're doing, where Mariner can't do anything right, but of course, she was faking it because actually she's still a Mary Sue. I didn't think it was bad. I just was like, meh. And again, I didn't even remember it until I rewatched it, so it just didn't make an impression on me, I guess. So overall, I'm going to give this episode a little better rating than I've given anything to this point. I'm going to give it a 7. Still not great, but 7 is pretty solid. Okay, so now let's get into Easter eggs and observations. So this was kind of funny too, actually. Freeman, Ransom, and Shax were wearing those covert gear that we see Picard, Crusher, and Worf wear in the Chain of Command episodes in the Next Generation, but they're just going to plant seeds, which is this little mission, which I thought was pretty funny. So there's funny parts in this episode. Mariner flat out makes a Captain Jellicoe reference. Ensign is exposed to Delta radiation in the Captain Pike BP chair. That was pretty funny. And at the end, there's actually like 3 people in the Captain Pike BP chair. There's this creature called Anthony, where the dude on the ship was like, yeah, I think he used to be human. That's the assumption. I think this was probably supposed to be based off of the salamanders from that terrible Voyager episode. What was that called? Flogging it from my memory. Whatever. Although they would make a more direct reference to that episode in season 2. I think they were kind of hinting at that. So there's a jellyfish type creature at the end that definitely was reminiscent of Encounter at Farpoint, which I think was intentional. We see Jennifer with yet another non-speaking role at I don't know if they call it 10 Forward, but their lounge, whatever, the bar, at the end of the episode. So that is all I got for episode 7. Now I get to get into the good stuff. Let's get into episode 8. All right, let's move on to season 1, episode 8, Veritas. So for me, I consider this the first true episode of Lower Decks. This is what Lower Decks would become after this season, into season 2, and especially in season 3. This is the type of stuff that they would do that I would come to love. And I don't think that they had done it quite this way up until the point. It's like they just do this thing where they just name drop a whole bunch of references on rapid fire, and it's just really, really good, really funny. They just do like a lot of obscure reference episodes, and they do it in a way that works and that is funny. And I think that's like a hallmark of the show moving forward, and they didn't really pull it off before this episode. So anyway, there's all kinds of just great hilarity from Mariner and Boimler on the bridge to Rutherford blinking out and waking up at the Gorn wedding, which is classic. Tendi being the cleaner. But mostly I appreciate this episode because it is a beautiful parody of that stupid trial episode. So Star Trek has done this trial episode trope repeatedly, where characters are falsely accused, or characters are accused by the Klingons or the Cardassians, or whatever, and they have, and it's a kangaroo court, and they have no chance of winning, or that sort of thing. It's kind of a combination of those sorts of things, but it wasn't really that. And the humor at the end really works for me when he's just like, "What? This is a party. That's the beam of celebration." That is so funny. The beam of celebration is so good. And I know, like, people will all say, I think it was my brother who pointed out, well, what is the eels? What was the point of having the eels if it was just a party? The point is that it's Lower Decks and it's supposed to be ridiculous. And it's just such a perfect parody of one of the most hated tropes in Star Trek for me. So this episode is a 9 out of 10 for its rating. Love this episode. The first truly great episode of Lower Decks. This is episode 8, Veritas. A 9 out of 10 for me. Okay, so now let's get into the Easter eggs and observations for episode 8. So Klar, who's the main alien on this episode, is voiced by Kurtwood Smith from That 70s Show, and of course appeared in Star Trek Voyager in the Year of Hell 2-parter, one of the best episodes in Star Trek. Boimler and Mariner at the beginning of this episode are arguing about Roga Danar versus Khan. Roga Danar, a deep cut. Who knew who Roga Danar was? I even had to look it up. I was like, who's that again? The name sounds familiar. He is from The Next Generation, 3rd season episode, The Hunted. So he has a genetic alteration, so they're arguing about him versus Khan. And Mariner says Khan was a real space seed, which refers to the title of the episode that Khan was in. Mariner also says, we're going to get kicked out and sent to Earth where there's nothing to do but hang out at vineyards and soul food restaurants. So she's making references to what Picard's family business was, as well as Sisko's family business. They would, of course, more directly parody the vineyards in season 3. And we would also see Sisko's soul food restaurant in that very same episode in season 3. So this is get some follow through this line. So Shax tells Rutherford, "We don't want you to get Denoblian flesh-eating bacteria on your penis," which is kind of a funny line, but refers to the Denoblians, which is the race of Phlox. From Star Trek Enterprise. We see a Romulan bird of prey from the original series. Of course, the aforementioned Gorn wedding, which is great. Q appears in this episode. I forgot to mention Q as another really funny part of this episode. He turns them into chess pieces, but there's cards, and then there's a soccer ball, and Freeman's like, "I guess we're playing some kind of game or something." So Q is pretty great. We see a salt vampire, this time in person, and they do mention that I thought they were supposed to be extinct because that was what was said in their original series episode that they appeared in. Boimler has this speech at the end when he says, "Did Picard know about the Borg? Did Kirk know about the giant Spock from Philos? Did Dr. Crusher know about the Scottish ghost?" So he's referencing, he references the Borg first, but then he references two infamously bad episodes in Star Trek. The first one being, I don't remember the name of the episode, that stupid one from the animated series where Spock becomes, or there's this giant clone of Spock, really bad episode. And of course, Dr. Crusher with the Scottish Ghost was from Sub Rosa, one of the worst episodes in Star Trek. So even in the Easter eggs, I'm talking about some of the funny stuff that this episode had. This episode really packed in the funny stuff. Okay, now we've got 2 episodes left, so let's move on to the really great episodes of this season. All right, let us now move on to episode 9. Crisis Point. So this one's a classic. This is the one from season 1 that I've seen the most times. I've watched it several times because it's one of my favorite episodes. It could potentially still be my favorite episode of the series, though it does definitely get some competition in season 2 and 3, especially season 3. So I don't know if it still holds up as my number one episode of Lower Decks, but it's definitely up there. And it's definitely, to me, the first truly great episode of Star Trek Lower Decks. I thought this one just really, really nailed it. Upon my rewatch, I don't know that there are necessarily quite as many just really funny, laugh out loud moments as I previously thought. Though it also may have just worn off. Some of the humor might have worn off slightly from frequent viewings. But the ones that they do have are just so good. They're so perfect. This is the best parody that Lower Decks had done up to this point, and still probably one of the best parodies that they've done of anything. That is particularly parodying the Star Trek films, and they do such a brilliant job with everything from the opening credits that go whoosh, whoosh, across the screen and hit Boimler on the head. And then they have Rutherford making the comment about, oh, we can do that. It's a movie. You can do all kinds of crazy stuff in a movie, which was so good. And of course, my favorite scene, the approaching the Cerritos scene when they are in the shuttlecraft. It is a direct parody of the motion picture scene where it takes literally 10 minutes. I timed it when I watched it recently, 10 minutes for Scotty and Kirk to get to the Enterprise from the shuttlecraft because they are slowly going to it, and they're playing the theme music slowly, and so Scotty and Kirk can admire the Enterprise, and that is what they're making fun of here, where the characters are kind of oohing and eyeing, and you see Billups with tears in his eyes. They're talking about, oh, what a pretty lady the ship is. And they're playing the Lower Decks music slowly. Da, 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 da. So I just cracked up laughing for 10 minutes the first time I saw this, and I still find it hilariously funny. But honestly, what makes this a truly great episode is the character stories, especially for Mariner, but actually a little bit for Boimler too. They're doing a little bit with Boimler in this episode, but mainly Mariner. This is kind of continuing the season-long arc with Mariner having confrontations with her mother, Captain Freeman, and Mariner is sent to therapy with Dr. Migliamu, but instead she takes it upon herself to do her own therapy, and she wants to get out her angst by casting herself as the villain in this Lower Decks movie, and ends up fighting herself. I mean, what a poignant scene. A character literally fighting against themselves and working through some of her stuff by seeing herself from an outside perspective. Because remember, this version of Mariner is based on personal logs and other stuff, so it does kind of represent who she is. So it's fascinating character development for Mariner to kind of see herself from the outside, and honestly is really good therapy. And Mariner has a great line. She's like, "Hey guys, therapy works." So that was so perfect, so good. Also with Boimler, I kind of love how he spends the whole episode trying to learn how to, best kiss Captain Freeman's ass. And he's preparing for this interview, so there's a lot of little funny scenes with him taking notes. There's a dramatic scene where the holodeck version of Ransom is dying, and he's like, "Quick, tell me, what's Captain Freeman's favorite kind of cookie?" But I love how he finds out that Captain Freeman is Mariner's mother, and then when he actually goes to this interview that he's been preparing for, he's just completely nervous and just completely unable to speak because he's freaked out because he just found out this huge secret. And I love how it ends with Captain Freeman saying, "Ensign Boimler didn't bother to prepare for the interview," even though he spent the entire episode preparing for the interview. So good. This episode just so good in so many different ways. This episode, without question, the rating out of 10 is a 10. Still one of the best episodes in Lower Decks, if not the best episode in Lower Decks. All right, let's do some Easter eggs and observations for this one. So Mariner has a line. This is an observation, really more an Easter egg. Mariner has a line where she says, "It's the '80s. We don't have psychiatric problems," which is referring to the 2380s. I didn't realize that they separated decades out like that in the 24th century, and I think it's probably making some kind of commentary about the 1980s as well. Da Vinci appears, of course. A famous holodeck character in season 4 of Star Trek Voyager, and he appears here. This is the first appearance of Dr. Migliamoo, the bird psychiatrist who makes a lot of food references, and I love how Captain Freeman at the end was like, "Stop referencing food!" And I think this was supposed to be a one-off character, but he's so good that he keeps coming back. And by the time we get to season 3, he gets to sit in the Counselor Troy chair on the bridge and even gets to be in charge of the Cerritos for a little bit. So love this character. First appearance here. In the holodeck, the admiral who sends them on the mission in the holodeck movie is the same one who says sensors, although I can't remember what the name of that admiral is. I tried to look it up, but I couldn't find it anywhere. This is the first episode, as I alluded to earlier, where Tendi kind of rejects the pirate stereotype for the Orions, which they would build on in season 2. And then also season 3 as well. So another Easter egg is at the end. They do the cast member signature like they did at the... What movie was that? I think it was Star Trek 6, where they had the signatures of the actors flying up on the screen. Was it 6 or was it different? Somebody will tell me in the comments. But they're doing a direct parody of that, so that's a little Easter egg there. All right, now let's move on to our final episode, which is episode 10, the season 1 finale. All right, let's now talk about the season 1 finale, season 1 episode 10, No Small Parts. So this was a really great finale. So it's filled with such hilarious moments. We got the Landrew reference at the beginning. I love how Landrew has a sign on it that says, I think it said, "Do not listen to," or "Do not take orders from," or something. And Captain Freeman threatens Landrew with the "Don't make me logic you to death." So good. And Landrew's like, "Landrew will be good." So good. Really getting into the deep cuts for the first time, which Lower Decks does a lot more frequently in seasons 2 and 3. Also very funny to see Riker in Lower Decks and how they kind of turned the Riker character into Lower Decks form. They Lower Dexize him and like fit him into this format, which was pretty great. And this was a much better Riker coming to save the day plot than we got in Picard season 1. This was the second time Riker comes and saves the day in Star Trek shows that it aired in 2020, but this one was better. This is also, in addition to being really funny, this was just a really good action-adventure Star Trek episode, something that Lower Decks hadn't done yet. It's the episode, the first episode that really shows us the crew kind of working together as a team, which I really liked. The Mariner and Freeman resolution does get undercut pretty much immediately in the beginning of season 2, but that's not really the fault of this episode. In fact, the endings of both season 1 and season 2 will immediately get undercut in the following season. Hopefully that doesn't happen again in season 4. So, you know, I'm not a huge fan of the Peanut Hamper character, but I have much more of a problem with her in that season 3 episode she appears in than here's, you know, it's fine, whatever. But overall, great finale, great episode of Lower Decks, and my rating out of 10 is a 9. Really strong finale, 9 out of 10. All right, let's do the Easter eggs and observations for this episode. Landrew, of course, is an Easter egg from the original series episode, Return of the Archons, but also Ransom looks at a picture of Kirk and Spock from the animated series, which was a nice touch. I love how Ransom says the TOS era, you know, the TOS days. You know, TOS stands for These Old Scientists. So good. I caught an old lady, like ensign, wearing blue, walking in the background, like she was a little old lady. It was like, huh, they have old ladies on the ship. We get this character Steve who says Wolf 359 was an inside job and changelings aren't real. I mean, war didn't happen, which is pretty funny. And I do believe he does pop up again in season 3, doesn't he? Doesn't that guy come back? But anyway, it was his first appearance. First outright mention of Dr. Katana wanting to hook up with Shax, although she would have to wait for him to come back to life. Mariner mentions that she has a tribble for personal use, which is kind of a funny line. What do you need a tribble for personal use? What does that mean? But that's kind of funny. Boimler, when he's transferred to the Titan, he has the Boimler effect plaque from episode 3. He brought with him to his room on the Titan. I think we hear the voice of Jennifer the Andorian, though we don't actually see her. Because Mariner earlier in the episode is like, Jen, who's Jen? No one's named Jen. And then at the end, when she is like leaving all these messages for Boimler, you hear a voice saying, "Shut up, I'm trying to sleep." And Mariner's like, "Shut up, Jen." So I think that might be Jennifer the Andorian. I had thought that we saw Jennifer the Andorian at the end of season 1, but actually we don't actually see her with voice speaking role until season 2. But she appears a lot in season 1 without speaking, and in this case, I think we just hear her voice only. All right, everybody, that does it. That wraps up all 10 episodes of Star Trek Lower Decks Season 1. Join me hopefully next month. By the end of next month, I might be able to get out my Season 2 video, and maybe it'll take till May. I'm not sure yet, but I will do a Season 2 rewind review soon. And also, in the meantime, you can subscribe to my channel and check out my Star Trek Picard weekly reviews of Star Trek Picard Season 3, which is currently airing. And check out all my other videos on all the Star Trek stuff I have. So you've got to subscribe, hit the bell for notifications, and I will see you all really soon. Thank you so much for watching, and goodbye.